Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, May 15th, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 Michigan gubernatorial election that's set to occur in just around a year and a half. Now, before we get into this video, I do want to say that yesterday was my final day of school, my final day of high school, so that's all said and done. That's why I wasn't uploading a video. I was at school in person, and then I went off into senior sunset, and then I just decided not to make a video. And so I will only be producing one video today, but I will be back to my 2 videos a day schedule starting tomorrow. So I took a day off, a day and a half off. But just a little clarification as to why I wasn't there. That's my little explanation. So looking at this governor's race, this is one that is going to be very, very contentious in the 2022 midterm elections. Michigan is a swing state. Michigan is one of the closer Biden states of the 2020 election and will certainly be targeted heavily by the GOP. Now, let's do a little bit of history before we get into why Michigan might be in one way or another. And I'm sure you can tell from the title of this video that Democrats are up in the state of Michigan. But before we get into that, let's talk about why that might be and how history in the state of Michigan can actually explain this little phenomenon that, not phenomenon, but just more of a plain number fact that Gretchen Whitmer currently is approved of in the state. In addition, is on track to be reelected. In 2014, this is the last time a Republican won the governor's race in the state of Michigan, and it wasn't by an extremely large amount. Rick Snyder, as the incumbent, might I add, won in a Republican wave year by 4.2%. Now, I'm not going to discredit his 4.2% victory in a state that had just voted for Obama by 10 points in the 2012 election. But I am going to point out that even in a red wave year, the margin of victory did not even top 5 points. And Rick Snyder, as the incumbent, could have done that. There were plenty of other Republicans that were able to win in states such as Wisconsin, where the margin was larger than the one in Michigan. If you're looking at the Republican margins around the country, if you're looking at Ohio, a state that voted for Barack Obama, John Kasich won by over 30 points. If you're looking at the state of Iowa, a state that was won by over 20 points, despite Obama winning here by 6 points 2 years prior. So while Michigan is a state that, Obama won by 10 points, it isn't necessarily close solely because of that reason. Rick Snyder and the Republican Party never really have the advantage in the state of Michigan and have only gotten lucky in off years and midterm years depending on the national environment. In 2018, it reverted back to its Democratic course, with Gretchen Whitmer winning an open seat by winning nearly 10 points more than Bill Schuette, the Republican opponent. This was a very large victory for the Democrats, and they looked at this and said, this means that whichever Democratic nominee there is will be on track to win the state of Michigan in the 2020 election. And they were right. In 2020, Michigan flipped back to the Democrats. Joe Biden wins here by nearly 3 points, a 2.8% margin of victory over Donald Trump. Now, I said flipped because Donald Trump actually did win the state in 2016, but he only won by 0.27%. He only won by 11,000 votes out of nearly 4.5 million cast in the entire state. Donald Trump won by 11,000 votes. So we're not talking about a state that has a strong Republican history as some of these other swing states might. We're not talking about a state that typically leans towards the right wing. Trump was the first Republican to win Michigan since 1988 under George H.W. Bush in his election. So Michigan was a state that the GOP was certainly happy to win after a very long time of it going towards the Democratic Party. Michigan in 2016 was an anomaly, not the standard. So when you're looking at some of these numbers, understand why Gretchen Whitmer might be up in the state rather than questioning whether or not she actually is up in the state. Because looking at these numbers, they aren't looking too good for the opponents. So if you're looking at the two candidates on the list here, you see Craig and you see James. Now, John James is a Republican who ran for Senate in 2018 and in 2020. He lost both times, but he got closer in 2020 and actually lost by a lesser margin than Kelly Loeffler did in Georgia in the runoff election. But then you have James Craig, the chief of the Detroit Police Department. Now, he's a Republican. He has publicly expressed interest in running for governor, pretty much saying that, he is considering running for governor in the state of Michigan against Gretchen Whitmer. has not officially announced, but he is going to be considered as a top name considering that he is the chief of the Detroit Police Department. And with the whole issue of the defund the police rhetoric and the Black Lives Matter movement, he certainly will get national media attention, which is why he's being included in these hypothetical polls. But how is he doing in the hypothetical polls? How is the police department, chief doing? Well, he's losing to John James. John James defeats him by 15 points in this head-to-head matchup, but there's still a considerable amount of voters who say, I'm undecided. But if those voters split 50-50, even 60-40, John James will narrowly edge out Craig here, just solely based off the margin in this state, 36-21. So a 15-point victory right now, largely because John James is a recognizable name. As I said, he ran in the 2018 election and the 2020 election. We can actually see because he became the nominee both times. If we open up the window here and look, he lost to Debbie Stabenow in 2018 by 7 points. He lost to Gary Peters by around 2 points. So while he did narrow up in 2020, the state also did narrow up as well. But let's take a look at what's happening. These new numbers sort of tell us a little bit of an interesting story, something that's very similar to what we saw happen in 2018. Gretchen Whitmer versus Bill Schuette was a race that was polled very often. In fact, this exact polling firm that we are looking at today accurately predicted the election back in September of 2018. Let's take a look. Target Insight /MIRS shows that Gretchen Whitmer was supposed to win by 9 points. Well, how much did she actually win by? Well, she won by 8.5%. 9, 8.5, within a 0.5% error difference. Now, I'm not sitting here and I'm not going to tell you that this poll taken a year and a half out will be exactly on the numbers, but they haven't exactly been that far off in the past. Target Insight showed a little bit more of a conservative lean, which also might spell out better news for Gretchen Whitmer if they actually do skew a little bit to the right, saying that Whitmer would win by 4. Well, she ended up winning by 9. So what are these numbers telling us for 2022? That she's going to win by 10 against James. She's going to win by 6 against Craig. Either way, she's victorious. And the thing is, because John James is winning this Republican primary poll, it makes sense. He's a recognizable name. He's been on the general election ballot in a presidential election year, in a high turnout Democratic election year. John James is a name that Republicans recognize because of his endorsements from President Trump, because of his campaigning ability, because of the fact that his name was plastered all over the state for the past 2 years. And if he does want to run for governor, he would be seemingly a shoo-in for the Republican primary. Oh my gosh, for the Republican primary. But what does this mean for the general? Well, he actually underperforms. Now, I don't think that this is something that is done solely by chance. I think that John James has gotten a pretty bad rep, considering that many people know him and associate him with President Trump. Considering that the state has just voted for Joe Biden and flipped away from Donald Trump, that is not a reputation you want in this state. So if John James does run and wins that nomination, you are going to see a lot of anti-Trump sentiment be one of the main reasons as to why some of these voters aren't backing him. But against James Craig, looking at the numbers, it seems like he's doing better. But I will say that once Whitmer is up to, 49% like she was against John James, you're going to start to see it get increasingly more difficult for James Craig to win. Now, also, I do want to point out that there are a lot of undecided voters in this Craig versus Whitmer race. You're talking about an undecided amount of, what is that, 20%? Or not even 20%. I can't do my math today. You're just talking about a lot of undecided voters in this state. And it's honestly quite interesting, 10%. I don't know why I said 20%. I think that I added an additional 10% out of nowhere. But looking at the 10% of voters that are undecided in this race, all that Gretchen Whitmer would need is a narrow sliver of that amount. You're talking 20% of those people, 21% of those people, and she wins the governor's race. And also, I do want to point out that of those who are undecided, many of them are Republican voters and are just refusing to say they are Republican voters. But who knows? Maybe the margin might be spot on the same way it was back in 2018. Who am I to argue with numbers? But I'm not going to try to say that. I'm not going to try to say that this is going to be the most accurate pollster of the entire year. I'm mainly only covering it because it's the first one, because it's given us sort of a glimpse into what 2022 might be and how this governor's race in particular is leaning towards the Democratic Party. But if you look at the history behind the state, that actually makes sense. It took a monumental year for Michigan to keep red in 2014. It took a year in which Republicans retained control of the House, the largest majority for the Republicans in the 21st century, where they won back control of the Senate, ditto, largest majority for the Republicans in the 21st century, and then went on 2 years later to win the presidency in Michigan and in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and across the United States. Rick Snyder as the incumbent Republican, winning by 4.2%. Sure, it's good, but it's not impressive. And given the year, the numbers should have been much, much larger as they were in Wisconsin, Ohio, and Iowa. All states that flipped from the Democrats in 2016. And just looking at the history of Michigan, when it comes down to an open race, yes, the Democrats have that advantage, but we will see what happens in 2022. And the numbers aren't too good for the GOP. The numbers are reflecting and telling us exactly what we saw happen with Bill Schuette and Gretchen Whitmer. These numbers, these, breakdowns, the polls all tell us that we might see a repeat of the 2018 midterm elections, at least in Michigan. I think on the national level, Republicans are going to win back control of the House. On the Senate level, it's going to be another story. At least that's off where it stands currently. The governor's race won't hold nearly as much implications as it would have going into a census year or going into a census end of the decade time period. But for Gretchen Whitmer to win re-election, it would be largely contingent on her popularity, onto whether or not the public likes her. And as you can assume from the numbers in her re-election bid, that she might be a liked individual. Well, you'd be right by assuming that. A March poll that questions whether or not Gretchen Whitmer is doing a good job, 52% of Michigan voters or Michigan people say that Gretchen Whitmer, has done a good job. I approve of the job of her as governor. When it comes down to favorability rating, this is more so about how much you actually like the person versus not. 49% of them say, I have a favorable opinion. Just 44% say an unfavorable position. That's a plus 5-point advantage on both the approval rating and the favorability rating. Well, she only needs plus 1 at the ballot box to win re-election. The thing about Gretchen Whitmer is, while she has been very much berated by members of the right wing for being much more COVID conscious than other governors, than other states, they need to realize that Michigan isn't a Republican state. It's far from it, actually. 2014 was a matter of circumstance, and 2016 was certainly an anomaly. That's exactly why it flipped back so easily in the 2020 election. Joe Biden won that state out of all of the states he flipped by the largest margin, 2.8%. For a state that had just gone to Donald Trump, you might expect it to hold out a little bit longer, but it looks like it's back on track to become and continue to be a Democratic state and a state that Democrats can rely on the statewide level. It actually reminds me a lot of North Carolina, a state that has a pretty strong Republican history that occasionally flips but traditionally doesn't. That's how I view Michigan. There's always an opportunity, and the opposition party almost always contests it, but generally speaking, it will take a lot in order for the GOP or the Democrats in North Carolina in order to win statewide. It would take the right turnout, it would take the right support, it would take the right endorsements, it would take the right campaign ads, campaign spending. Everything would have to go right for Democrats in North Carolina, the same with Republicans in Michigan. And if one thing goes wrong, then it seems to be game over. And that's what largely has been driving many of these Republican politicians in Michigan out of the state and into the ground. Many of these politicians who are in positions where they might think that they could win a House race in Michigan or a Senate race in Michigan and then end up being wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, that's something that they're going to have to deal with. And just looking at the state itself, I think that people also fail to realize that because of the demographic breakdown in Michigan, the state is largely swayed by the white working class, in addition to heavy, compact population centers with large black populations. Without the combination of some of the white working class voting for Democrats, on top of the, hundreds of thousands of voters in the minority groups in Detroit and Ann Arbor, when they vote blue, they drive the state towards the left. But it only works if the white working class is working with them. Once the white working class switches sides like they did in 2016, the Republicans end up winning. But that was one example. It was not something that was the standard. which is why I think that Gretchen Whitmer going into 2022 could bring us back to where we were in 2018 in this governor's race. While Gretchen Whitmer may not be the most liked, while her approval rating may only be +5, that's not bad for someone in a swing state. That's not bad for someone who has been very strict and very serious about COVID-19 relative to some of her neighbors or some of her colleagues in the National Governors Association. So all in all, Gretchen Whitmer, popular as recently as March of 2021. There's new data out that sort of confirms the exact same thing. The state itself doesn't exactly have a Republican history. There are a few exceptions, but when it comes down to reverting back to the traditional way they vote, it's almost always blue. And based off these numbers that we are seeing, Gretchen Whitmer is certainly the front runner to win this governor's race and win another 4-year term from the state of Michigan. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 midterm election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.